Welcome back. This is Mike, and we are in the third KSP 1.05 tutorial. This one's a little different in that we are trying desperately to record after actually having finished this in order to make them a little shorter and a little more edited. Just to recap, we are at the point where we're doing a slew of moon contracts. We have 2 tourists that we need to take to the moon, and we're currently building a bus. This is going to basically be the same as the moon orbiter we built before, except you have a Mark 1 airplane cabin, the Mark 1 passenger cabin behind that, then the heat shield. You will notice though, if you're comparing this to the previous moon orbiter rocket, it's effectively the same rig. You'll follow the same basic plan, getting into orbit, flattening out. Once you're in a reasonably equatorial orbit, you'll do a burn toward the moon just as it's rising above the horizon of Kerbin. The one thing I was a little worried about here is the airplane cabin is obviously not as heat resistant as a capsule. As it turns out, the heat shield is up to the challenge. So after a fairly messy orbit, the tourists get a nice view of the moon. We make a huge amount of money. We do pick up some science going past. We have some barometers glued on the back of our little airplane. We even get a gravity assist off the moon on the second go-around to slow us down a little more. This was the part I was concerned with. I entered the atmosphere at over 3 kilometers per second. The tourist bus handles it just fine. 2 radial mount parachutes are enough to get it on the ground safely and back in. So having done that, we're now at 415,000 funds. A little more money would be nice. We want to do some upgrades at this point. We're going to grab a satellite contract. I wanted to touch on satellite contracts. They are a money maker. Early game, they may seem a little difficult because you don't have a ton of control, but we're going to start just making a basic satellite. We will go ahead and put some solar panels and some science gear on it because once it's in orbit, we are going to get a little bonus science from it. That's basically the entirety of the satellite. It is important to have batteries enough to transmit your data, and the contract actually calls for a satellite to have both a transmission system and batteries, so they have to be on there. I did put a small reaction wheel on it just for steering. The upper stage is simply a small fuel tank and not a twitch engine. I'm losing my mind. Lower stage is, of course, a swivel and a single thumper SRB. So it's a fairly inexpensive launch vehicle, which is good. It's a satellite. We're not getting any of it back. The 30 parts limit at the VAB is beginning to be an issue. So there's our contract orbit. We need to get the satellite into that orbit at that inclination. We don't have a lot of really cunning ways to match that inclination. We're going to just do it by eye. So as usual, basic orbit, not even trying to match the inclination yet. We're just going into an equatorial orbit. Once you've set your node, you can turn it to match the inclination. Make your apoapsis match the apoapsis of the target orbit as best you are able. You'll note we're on that final stage already getting into orbit, but it has something like 5,000 delta V pushing a tiny payload, so not an issue. We actually overshot and I brake a little bit. There we go. So now that you're lined up on the orbit, your target orbit for the satellite, you're going to do a burn when you reach that point and come as close as you can to matching the orbit. You'll notice it's not dead on the target orbit. It's actually fairly sloppy. It's off a fair ways. The game is fairly forgiving. It will tend to allow you to complete a contract as long as you're in roughly the same plane at roughly the same orbit. And so we're just doing a prograde burn here, not at full throttle, so we can turn it off at the right time. Lovely, and it completes, which is a bunch more money for us. We're going to grab some science while we're here and transmit that back. We are starting to run up against the problem of the 30 part limit at the VAB. Since following this mission, the next tutorial is going to look at sending some manned missions out and making a lot of science. We need to do something about that. So we're going to make sure that we do in fact upgrade the VAB at this point. And on the tech tree, after lots of faffing about, we went ahead and got advanced flight controls for the Mark 1 lander can. We're going to want to be sending some manned missions. The lander can is an excellent vehicle to do that in. And we are going to upgrade the astronaut complex to allow for EVAs in space and for planting flags. So that's it for this one. Much shorter, much more to the point, and we'll follow up with some landings.